I reckon I've always had a bit of an unfair prejudice against agaves, and that might be because here in Sydney, they're either a really boring landscaping plant, like this one, or they're a roadside weed. But I feel like it's time to shed those prejudices, because having a little bit of a closer inspection of the amazing genus of the agaves reveals some incredible plants, vicious, gnarly, alien-looking things, beautiful and amazing cultivars, and everything in between. So today, we're shedding the boring landscape plant stereotypes and having a real deep dive into just what agaves can represent. So let's not delay, let's go and check out everything you could possibly ever want to know about this surprisingly fantastic genus of plants. Now, agaves are a genus of succulents that come from the Americas, and like a lot of arid growing plants, they come with fantastically vicious means of defending themselves. On many of the species, you'll find the leaves are tipped with incredibly sharp spines. You'll certainly get to know about them if you accidentally walk into one and it goes straight into your flesh. I know from experience. But despite that incredibly vicious demeanour, the thing I think I've found most surprising as I've scratched under the surface of this family of plants is the amazing cultivars that exist out there in cultivation. For example, get a load of this. This is a plant called Agave Galactic Traveller. It's a variegated hybrid. And what you can see, each leaf, this very delicate light bluey green colour, surrounded by a margin of a really bold yellow. It's quite striking in its appearance, and it only gets more impressive as it puts on size. Now, many of the agave cultivars out there today have similarly striking variegation. You'll find plants where the margins are variegated, others where the centre of the leaves are, and usually it's this yellow form. But I'll tell you what, there's one cultivar which rises above all others. It's called Agave Victoria Reginae White Rhino. And the name speaks to what's so amazing about its appearance. It has a striking white variegation. And I suppose that white rhino name reflects that vicious horned shape of the leaves. Very hard to come across. Even though this cultivar has existed now for quite a while, these plants are very expensive. You pay a real premium for an agave white rhino, I'll tell you what. But if you're looking to add something that's quite beautiful, as well as a little bit deadly, into your collection, don't need to look too much further than a beautiful agave cultivar. But you know what? For me, it's always species plants that grab my attention. Are there agave species that are similarly striking? Tell you what, the answer is a resounding yes. Let's have a look at a few. So if you've watched Aridzine for any period of time, you'd know that the sorts of plants that really reel me in are the most vicious, alien, horrific looking things. That's why I like all sorts of monsters and mutants. And the agave family does not disappoint in that area. This here is an Agave titanota, and those spines on the leaf margins, not just a tiny little point, but I would describe them as almost resembling shark teeth. They're huge, they're vicious, and they form a margin that extends the perimeter of the leaf. Now, this species is not unique in that fact. There are many, and I'll share a few of those on the screen right now, that are similarly violent in their appearance. I'll tell you what, you really don't want to get your flesh hooked into one of these bad boys, because that would really teach you the meaning of pain. Now, Agave titanota and its relatives are remarkable in that sort of vicious appearance. But there are other species that are surprisingly unique. For example, there's another species that was discovered not all that long ago out in Mexico called Agave albopilosa. And unlike many of its relatives, instead of each leaf being tipped with a gnarly spine, instead they've got this really unique fuzz of hair. Quite a surprising adaptation and very, very different to almost everything else amongst the agaves. And as you can imagine, that makes them quite collectible as well. I'd love to get my hands on one. Now, I'm going to keep sharing with you some of the more amazing cultivars and species of the agaves as we continue to explore a few other aspects of this really surprising and very deep genus of plants. Now, even though all agaves are essentially a spray of leaves emerging from a central point, if it hasn't become quite obvious, there's actually a surprising diversity in how that form is expressed. Recently, I went to the botanical gardens of Wollongong, and there they have some absolutely monstrous plants. They dwarfed me, leaves that towered above everything. My knowledge of the Variegated family is no stronger. These, however, I can safely say are easily the fattest, most monstrous examples of an agave I've ever seen. Look at those leaves, they are huge. And the spines on the end of them, you can impale yourself. Again, you can see recalcitrant youth have decided to stake their claim on this plant. I didn't catch the name of the species, they were very poorly labelled, I'll tell you what. But, just goes to show, you can have agaves that are utterly gigantic in size, and that stands in stark contrast to this little cultivar. This is a cultivar named Agave pygmy, for pretty obvious reasons. Doesn't get much bigger than an Australian 20-cent coin. Now that to me is mind-blowing. The fact that within one genus you can go from plants that tower over me to others that have been bred to fit within the palm of my hand just speaks to the remarkable diversity of this genus of plants. There's always something for everyone, whether it's beautiful, massive or tiny. The agaves have got it all. Now if you're enjoying Aridzine, can I please implore you, hit subscribe, hit like, and you might want to check out aridzine.com.au. You can find really rad merch there, like the Scary Cactus t-shirt, and there's also the Patreon, which is for the absolute succulent obsessed. There are bonus videos that go out every single week if you can't get enough Aridzine, so that might be well worth checking out too. Anyway, let's get back into the fantastic and bizarre world of agaves. Now, it would be impossible of me to share a video about agaves and neglect by far their most significant cultural impact the world over. I am, of course, talking about tequila, that alcoholic beverage which is derived from Agave tequiliana. Essentially what you'll find is that Mexican farmers will chop those huge succulent leaves off the plant, leaving this fattened core from which you'll get the extract, which is fermented and turned into, well, for some, a delicious alcoholic drink. It's a huge industry in Mexico, as you can imagine, and you find that tequila and its derivatives are now everywhere, all over the world. Quite remarkable that all that comes from one species of plant, which is clearly propagated and harvested en masse. Now, speaking of propagation, how do we propagate our agaves? There are two really simple ways, and I'm going to share those with you right now. So you've got an agave and you want more of them. Well, the easiest approach is removing offsets. These are plants that usually offset or pup quite readily, and you can see on my Titan odor here that it's got a few that have formed, and they are easily big enough now to separate and put into their own pots. So I'm going to do this now. I'm going to try and do it barehanded, and hopefully I don't come away with mangled flesh. So the first step to this is taking it out of its pot and seeing what lies below, and then hopefully it's going to be a pretty straightforward job getting those pups off. Let's give it a crack now. So get the soil off, get it out of its pot. There we go. And what I'm going to do off camera, I'll get the soil off this thing and we'll be able to see how these pups are attached, and that'll make them very easy to remove. Now that root ball has been freed from the soil, what we're actually going to find is that these pups are very loosely attached, and so it becomes a pretty simple and straightforward job to remove them. Just grip them, give them a gentle pull, and you'll find that they come with their own roots already growing into the soil, which is going to make planting them up a real simple job. You don't have to worry about going through that rooting process. Put that one aside, and now we'll just get this other one off. Again, Gentle tug, get the roots out. Perfect. 2 new plants added to the collection to sit alongside the original mother plant. How good and how easy was that? There is, of course, another alternative, and that's growing these plants from seed. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of depth on sowing agave seeds, but I have had a bit of fun in that space recently, so I thought I'd share with you the results. I mentioned before about agaves with really vicious and alien spines, and I reckon the plant that takes the cake is a species that comes from the United States. It's called Agave utahensis, the subspecies Arborispinus. And what you'll find is that particular species has these huge, long, gnarly, kind of wave-like spines that emerge, an amazing and incredible adaptation for defense. They're also a really cold hardy species, so if you live in a part of the world that isn't always succulent friendly, they might be one to check out. Now, about 5 or 6 months ago, I sowed some seeds of that particular species of plant, and as you can see, they've absolutely come up like weeds. Agaves, they love to grow from seed. They're very, very virile. Now, these plants, as you can see, are completely crowding each other out. They germinated at a rate that was probably higher than I anticipated. And so now that it's spring here in Sydney, I've got the joyful job of separating all of these, potting them up, and filling another chunk of space in my already crammed greenhouse. Now, when it comes to agaves and how they grow from seed, what you're going to find is that agaves send up this huge flower spike. They're actually what's called monocarpic, and that's a real technical term for the notion that when they flower, the plant dies. Basically, when you see a flower come up on your agave, you know that its lifespan has come to an end. That doesn't always mean that that plant itself is a goner though, because often as they start to die, they will send out plenty of offsets, and that particular plant will continue on in the form of the babies around it like that. And also, of course, seeds. Now, speaking of those flowers, agaves are members of the Asparagaceae family, and that means that they share relatives with your common asparagus. And tell me this, when you see one of those enormous, fantastic spikes of flowers, now that you know this fact, tell me you're not going to just imagine a giant spear of asparagus rising high into the sky. I know I certainly do every time I see them. Now, how do you care for an agave? It's really remarkably simple. These plants have a will to live. I've never even managed to kill an agave in all the time I've been growing plants, even when I had absolutely no idea about what I was doing. Because it boils down to 3 very simple things: light, water, and temperature. These plants, they grow outdoors, and they do love a decent amount of light, of course, depending on the species. However, even despite that, I've seen people growing agaves indoors well away from a window. I'm not sure that the plants are happy, but they're not dead either. When it comes to water, these plants are arid, succulent, drought-loving things, and they can survive long periods without water. That means that they're going to want a nice, well-draining soil, amend it with a bit of chunky mineral stuff, and you'll be sweet as. And then, when it comes to temperatures, obviously not all of these plants are as cold hardy as your Agave utahensis. So do a little bit of research based on your climate and the climate that the plant comes from, and you'll find a happy position where you can keep it, especially over the winter, because these plants over the summertime can typically endure some pretty belting heat. If you do all of those things, I can't see where you can go wrong. Honestly, they are just evolved to survive even the most shocking abuses in our cultivation. So especially for beginners, these are a fantastic genus of plants to explore. And they are quite beautiful and strange too, which is a fantastic bonus. Now today I've only really had the opportunity to explore the very fringes of this enormous genus, looking at some of the most beautiful, the most bizarre, and some of the most vicious of these plants. But within all of that, there is a huge variety. And so I really strongly recommend you get out there and you do a bit of research, because I'm sure that there is going to be an agave to suit the tastes of every succulent lover, no matter where you come from. And so that's agaves for you, and why I've gone from finding these plants fairly obnoxious to quite a stunning addition to my collection, even if I'm only just starting to scratch the surface. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. I'm Michael, this is Arid Zine. I'll catch you next Monday.